I'm Ellen Broom, Managing Director of Core and Bath.
And I'm Gillian Schofield. I'm Emeritus Professor of Child and Family Social Work at the University of East Anglia.
And I'm Mary Beek, and I'm an Honorary Research Fellow at the School of Social Work at the University of East Anglia.
So nice to have you here today, Jill and Mary, and really excited to hear you talking about your new book, or your new edition of your book. And I'm really, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to go to you first, Jill. Could you tell me a little bit about what the secure base model is and how did it come about?
Okay, well, the secure base model is a practical therapeutic caregiving framework. It's based on theory and research, and it's been designed to help practitioners, foster carers and adopters to build positive relationships and improve outcomes for vulnerable children. The model was first developed about 20 years ago when Mary and I were trying to make sense in our research of what the more successful foster carers were offering to children. So we turned to classic attachment theory in the work of Mary Ainsworth. And Ainsworth, back in the 1970s, identified caregiving qualities that helped infants build secure attachments. And we applied these to our foster care research and went on to develop the findings into a therapeutic model that's relevant not only for infants, but also older children and young people. So I think that was the big contribution, really, to look at attachment theory across the age range. And we've been able to work with and develop the model over the years, including training materials and these practice guides. We chose to focus on the term secure base because in attachment theory, a secure base is provided for a child through a relationship with one or more caregivers, which provides a reliable, safe haven and reduces the child's anxiety, thus becoming a secure base for exploration that promotes security, confidence and competence and resilience. So I think it's important to note that the real evidence for success is not the child being able to seek comfort from a caregiver. It's what that relationship enables the child to do, to try new activities, play and education and so forth. So in the secure base model, we've got 5 caregiving dimensions and each promote a key aspect of children's development. And that allows practitioners and caregivers to focus on and set goals for promoting children's strengths and addressing their difficulties. And the 5 dimensions are represented by a star diagram that shows how the dimensions work together and interact. And these dimensions need to be understood, of course, in terms of the child's history, behaviour, age and stage. So a core understanding of child development is very valuable in implementing the model. And in particular, what we've called the caregiving cycle, which shows the interaction of the caregiver's thinking and feeling and behaviour and its impact on the child's thinking, feeling and behaviour. And that underpins how the 5 dimensions are presented for practitioners and for caregivers. So the first dimension is availability, helping the child to trust. And this focuses on the caregiver's ability to convey to the child a strong sense of being physically and emotionally available to meet their needs, both when they're together and when they're apart, which is also very significant. When the caregiver can do this consistently and in a range of circumstances, the child, whatever their difficulties previously, begins to learn to trust that their needs will be met warmly, consistently and reliably. And as their anxiety is reduced and over time, the child gains the confidence to explore the world, safe in the knowledge that care and protection is there if needed. So this is at the heart, obviously, of the secure base concept. The second dimension is also absolutely key to the model. It's sensitivity, helping the child to manage their feelings. And sensitivity here means the caregiver having the ability to think about and to value what this child is thinking and feeling, and how that might be affecting their behaviour. So again, using that caregiving cycle to understand what's going on for the child and how you understand that in their mind. But also the caregiver needs to reflect on how the child makes them feel and how that affects their behaviour. And again, that's a very important element in the cycle of availability, sensitivity, and the others. So sensitivity is a key dimension. So as our research and others have suggested, carers who are good at tuning into the child's thinking and feeling, sometimes talked about as reflective caring, seeing the world from the child's point of view and helping the child to see the world from other people's point of view. They're often also good at understanding a child's need, for example, for contact with their birth family, or how to help a teenager find an activity that will make them feel successful. So although it has a rich history in attachment theory and research, this concept of sensitivity, at the heart of it is this idea of tuning into and being interested in the mind of the child. Then the third dimension, acceptance, building the child's self-esteem, tackles a common and fundamental problem for children from troubled backgrounds. So acceptance is about accepting the child for who they are, even when the child needs help for difficult behaviours to change so that they can become accepted by others. But it's also about finding something to love and value in the child. And I think we found this so powerfully when we were interviewing foster carers, even when they were describing children who had very significant difficulties, they could find something to love in the child, and helping the child then to feel pride in themselves, and also for the child to discover that they can both love and be lovable, as well as cope with setbacks. And I think this is also very important. It's not just about building self-esteem through praise, it's enabling children to manage when they're not chosen for the football team, or when they don't get invited to a party, or when other people are just better at things than they are. And sometimes children with low self-esteem really struggle with those feelings. And the fourth dimension, cooperation, helping the child to feel effective. That builds on self-esteem, as it's about helping a child who may have previously felt powerless to make choices within safe boundaries, to feel confident and effective. And that can start with infants enjoying choosing what they like to eat and feeding themselves, to older children enjoying being able to play on their own as well as playing and negotiating with others. And for teenagers, a tricky one this, but obviously it's about being appropriately independent for their age, while also feeling enough trust, really, thinking of the availability dimension, to seek comfort and to accept help and support. So it's a very important dimension in terms of caregivers accepting that it's not all about being in control. Actually, even from the early stage of a placement, it's about how you can enable the child also to work with you, to work together. And then finally, this fifth and final dimension, which Mary and I added to the attachment theory dimensions, is family membership, helping the child to belong. And for children in foster care and adoption, this will mean belonging often to more than one family, often to different communities. So the idea of belonging is an underpinning concept in permanence. So it's a key element in all successful caregiving. But as I say, especially in permanent placements, as it reflects the significance of a sense of belonging as part of a child's secure base. The feeling that you have a family to go back to through childhood and in adulthood, whatever happens, whatever your problems, is also about establishing an identity. So I think the overall message of the model is that all these dimensions work together, but also that a number of relationships and identities can contribute to a child's secure base, reducing anxiety and promoting security and resilience. So I think attachment theory is sometimes criticised for being so specific about one or maybe two caregivers. Whereas I think with the secure base concept and the model itself, it widens that out to thinking about what other relationships can provide for children, whether that's at school or in the extended family, and so on. So it comes from attachment theory, but it develops from it. I think that's probably the main thing to say about the model.
Thank you so much, Jo, and really fascinating to hear about that sort of finding that you are lovable by someone else loving you and sort of building that resilience. Really, really interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about how it's used by professionals in practice?
Yeah, well, we found over the years, really, that the secure base model can be used by individual practitioners who find it very helpful in their work, or by teams, perhaps fostering teams, adoption teams who choose to work with it particularly. But more broadly, implementation by local authorities and also by agencies has been a very effective and a more strategic approach to incorporating the model into systems, procedures, and documentation. So implementing the model often means ensuring, for example, that a framework for supervising foster carers or for supporting adopters could include looking at each dimension to think about how that's working for them. And that often benefits from a more systemic approach. But on the other hand, as we said, individual practitioners can use it for themselves. And then I think beyond that, the best way to think about using the model is to focus on the different stages of the child's journey through placement. So the model provides a framework through these dimensions of assessing the child's development and needs, which could be while the child is still in their birth family, or perhaps in a current foster placement where a care plan is being developed. So it can be used in care planning, obviously, but also in court reports, and courts have reported finding that very helpful, really, to have a framework that focuses on development and the needs of the child. And then the model can also be used for assessing the current or prospective caregiver's capacity to meet a child's needs. So that can be done as part of the initial assessment of carers and adopters. It can be where a child is in placement, and it can be thinking about where the child might best be placed in the future. So it can help with thinking about short-term carers, where the goal might be to return the child home or make a move to a kinship, long-term foster care or adoptive placement. What are their carers' capacities for being wholehearted in their care for the child in that period, but also being able to enable the child to move. And then the obvious consequence of having good assessments of the child and appropriate assessments, good assessments of prospective carers, matching a child with a foster carer or adoptive family, because it puts together the child's development and matches it, thinking about, for example, the child's capacity to trust with the caregiver's capacity to support and accept perhaps a child who has a very different set of qualities and identity to themselves. So that's also very important. Then once in placement, the goals for the child can be thought about with the caregiver. So those might be quite formal goals, for example, discussed at a looked after children review, but they may also be goals for the child discussed with an adopter where the child is about to be placed. Where are the areas of this child's development that are going to need particular care in the early days, for example? And then once a child has been in placement for a while, it may be about thinking about how you celebrate progress. It may seem that you're feeling very stuck with a little baby, but then the baby starts to look to the carer or the adopter for comfort or to enjoy a toy. So those goals then become a very important part, and the framework allows you to do that and divide up the different elements of the child's development. And then finally think about supporting the caregiver's journey as well as the child's journey. So from the point of approval through, possibly for foster carers, it might be annual reviews. For adopters, it might be again thinking about how the early stages of placements are going. How can they think about what the strengths are, how well it's going, and what support the caregivers might need into the future. So I think at every stage of the child's journey, which I think is still a helpful concept, it's important to think about the different ways in which sharing a common language, common understanding of dimensions can be helpful.
Thank you so much, Jill. I think it's really interesting, and they're quite unusual. It's quite an unusual model in that way, that it can be applied both sort of strategically across, say, a local authority with frameworks, but also really applied in the day-to-day assessing and working with, and for a caregiver to think about, am I meeting this child's range of needs in these dimensions? I think it's a really interesting and unusual, I think, model for that. Thank you for that. So the reason we're here today is that Core and BAF are obviously publishing new editions of the secure-based practice guides, one for social workers and one for foster carers and adopters. Can you tell us a little bit about the changes over the past few years that have contributed to these new editions, and why we've come to having new editions and why they're necessary?
First, it's important to say that the core of the secure-based model, the 5 caregiving dimensions and the links to developmental outcomes, has stood the test of time very well. So we hear from practitioners who've used the model for years over time, and practitioners discovering the model for the first time. I guess you would hope that would be the case, because it draws on such classic attachment theory and research, and also child placement research. But what was really valuable for Mary and I with these second editions was to be able to use feedback from practitioners about where language and examples may need to be updated. So we've adapted some of the wording of the caregiving approaches. We've included reference to trauma, for example, which I know is a way of thinking about safeguarding and the long-term developmental consequences of abuse and neglect. And we felt that was valuable to do that. And we've adjusted some elements of how we talk about family membership and birth family membership. I think, given the renewed emphasis on the importance of acknowledging children's birth family history and so on. And in other matters, in terms of the language, we also needed to adjust gender pronouns. So I think that was also a way of updating the text for the current sort of climate and the way we talk about children and growing up. We also made sure that the new editions were consistent with the second edition of the Attachment Handbook for Foster Care and Adoption, which first came out in 2006, published by BAF, and had a second edition in 2018. And that is a more in-depth look at aspects of the caregiving approaches and so on, more theoretical, but it also, we wanted to make both these publications consistent with each other. And then I suppose just finally, we've also added some key references that relate to other new and linked work. That's one of the best examples would be the UEA model for moving children from foster care to adoption, which has been relatively recently published by Core and BAF, draws very much on the secure-based material. So we've also looked for consistency between those two publications and referenced the moving to adoption publication in these new editions. So not major changes to the core model, but I think important changes and additions to the text, which we hope people will find helpful.
Thank you so much, Gillian. I mean, language is one of those things that you perennially kind of have to update as things move and change, and you have to reflect that to make sure it's relevant. So thank you so much for that, Jill. Mary, if I can come to you now. In both the guides, you explain the sort of caregiving strategies associated with the 5 dimensions of the secure base model that Jill mentioned earlier, which kind of help to develop security and resilience for a child or a young person. Can you give some examples of these strategies?
Yes. So just to focus on one of the caregiving dimensions, availability, providing availability which helps children to build their trust. A very useful strategy, a very basic but very helpful strategy, particularly for babies and younger children, is to provide a very predictable daily routine around getting up, meal times, bath times, play times, so that the child knows what to expect as they go through their day, talking through that routine, helping the child to know what's going to happen next. All helps the child to begin to trust in their environment, begin to trust that their caregivers are going to be there for them, that they're going to be reliably and consistently and safely looked after. Those routines are really important for all children, and as they get a bit older, perhaps into middle childhood, then sometimes a picture chart can help, pinned up onto the fridge, and something that the child can actually see to help them predict what's going to happen next in their world. And that can also be helpful when the routines have to change, because obviously sometimes at weekends and holidays, things have to be different. And so children need to be able to understand and adapt and adjust to that as well. Another strategy within this availability dimension is to demonstrate availability. I think Jill mentioned it, even when the caregiver is apart from the child. And some children find it very hard, perhaps when they're at school, or away from the foster or adoptive family, to hold in mind and remember that those adults are still there for them and thinking about them and will be there for them on their return. And so a strategy that can help with that perhaps is something like a message in a lunchbox, or perhaps to work with the school. Again, Jill mentioned, it's really important that the whole network of the child is brought into this caring, secure, providing elements of this secure base. So you might work with a teacher and ask them to reassure an anxious child that the caregiver will come to pick them up at the end of the day, and just help them to hold in mind that predictable, available care. And then all of the secure-based dimensions are important all through children's middle childhood and well into the teens and late teens. And so it's important to think about how the caregiver can demonstrate that kind of availability even to teenagers who are obviously leading much more separate lives from outside the family. Some caregivers find it very helpful to set aside and plan for special time with a young person, perhaps a special outing that they would enjoy or an activity that they might share together, but something that allows that one-to-one focus, time and energy on the young person. Some young people, of course, are more resistant to that. And so caregivers often find ways of being unobtrusively available to them, perhaps using a car journey or a dog walk, or simply being around at a time when they sense that the young person might just want to chat and talk about things with them. So that's 3 examples of working with children in this availability dimension.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I think your reflections there of the dog walk with the unobtrusively there, the sort of hanging around in the background, slightly unobtrusively as a parent or a caregiver, I think that resonates, and I think a lot of parents and will recognise that type of strategy. If we can move on, one of the practice guides promoting attachment and resilience was written with foster carers and adoptions in mind. Can you talk a little bit about how parents and carers can best use the secure base model to offer support and sensitive care for children? Obviously, we're talking here about children who will have had very difficult backgrounds or potentially really traumatic experiences in their earlier lives.
Yes. Well, I mean, one thing to say is that the model can be very affirming, I think, for foster carers and adopters, because as you've seen from the examples, these are very much everyday, moment by moment caregiving approaches. And when foster carers and adopters hear about the model, perhaps for the first time, they often feel, well, we're doing a lot of that already, and that's great. We're really pleased to hear that is the case. But often, once they have that framework in their minds and an understanding of the theory behind it, it helps them to build on what they're doing already, perhaps to do a bit more of it, perhaps tackle things in a slightly different way, from a slightly different angle. And I think it builds confidence to try a bit more, knowing that what you're doing already is actually very helpful to the child. And an example of that I can give comes from a foster father. He spoke to me during a training session, and he had found the cooperation dimension, this promoting effectiveness, helping the child to feel effective, promoting choice, and a sense of agency. He'd found that to be really helpful with a child that he and his partner were looking after. This little boy had some very challenging behaviours, particularly around meal times, and he would throw his food and shout and get down from the table and refuse to eat, and meal times were really difficult. But the foster father had noted that when they went to his parents for Sunday lunch, these behaviours were much less apparent. So he had to think about what was happening here, and it occurred to him that his parents had a different way of serving food. They used vegetable dishes, put the food in dishes, and the children, everyone, helped themselves to what they wanted. And with that cooperation, effectiveness, a sense of agency in mind, he tried it at home and found mealtimes were much calmer when the child was able to help himself, to choose what he wanted to eat, rather than having a plate full of food put in front of him. So just a very simple tweak in a family routine in that situation was actually very helpful to that carer.
Thank you so much, Mary. And it's all about finding what works for that child, isn't it? About adapting whatever it is you're doing to that individual child and sort of working out what they need and how they can receive it, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the secure base framework gives caregivers an anchor, I think, to make those adaptations from.
And something about holding it in mind, doing a bit more of, not slightly from a slightly different angle. I think that's a really, really interesting way to think about it. Just sort of to wrap up our conversation, looking forward, I'd be really interested to hear, what contribution do you think that the secure base model can make to future good practice in fostering and adoption and kind of ensuring that children fulfill their potential?
Well, I think it's perhaps we're always at a time of challenges for foster care and adoption, but we do seem to have some specific challenges at the moment in all sorts of aspects. So it's so important that when we're worried about recruitment or matching, whatever, that we don't forget that we still need this model at the heart of it all, which is about the quality of the caregiving and how we can empower caregivers to feel confident, foster carers and adopters, in taking on troubled children. And actually, I think that is such an important element to give people the tools that they can use. And I think Mary's examples have really highlighted how it is about the ordinary, everyday caregiving. And that although we hope that specialist therapeutic support and services and so on are available, what people need to understand is actually that the everyday care that they're giving is so powerful, and that the framework that they can feel confident in and can also share with professionals and practitioners, so if they need that support, or indeed with other foster carers and adoptive parents as well, so, or foster carers can share with schools. I think the fact that you've got something that breaks down, if you like, parenting into terms and dimensions that are very practical and understandable, and there's a good source of communication. So I think it continues to develop. We have gone into other areas of schools and residential care, but at the heart of it for foster care and adoption, it's this, you know, the quality of family life can so much be improved where caregivers feel confident in the care that they're giving, and children are bound to thrive when that's going to be the case. So we continue to be available to support agencies at times, and we look forward to seeing how it gets used and developed in the future.
Thank you so much, Gillian. Thank you so much, Mary. I think you said that it is definitely a time of challenge, and we know that children coming into care have more needs and more complex needs sometimes these days. So the quality of that caregiving that they get, the everyday, the quantity, or as well as quality of care is really, really important. And I think the secure-based model gives you such a, I mean, I reflect as a parent myself, that these are things that I'd want to hold in mind and that I'd want to think about to make sure that my own children, and I think that's what all caregivers are trying to do, isn't it? Adapt it for their own children that they're looking after. I think it's really, really interesting, and I've really enjoyed our conversation today. So thank you so much, Jill. Thank you so much, Mary. I think it's been a really nice conversation, and thank you for coming today and sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you for updating those practice guides so that professionals and practitioners can use them. Thank you so much.
Thank you.